Hello there, and welcome back to Crime Whispers. I know many of you listen to these stories as you drift off to sleep. So before we begin tonight's case, I thought it might be fun if everyone left a comment letting me know where in the world you're listening from, and of course, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the cases we share here together now. Let's get comfortable, let the world grow quiet around us, and begin tonight's first story. It was 9 a.m. on April 18th, 1990, when a middle-aged woman named Hisako Uchi walked into the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department. Her face was pale with worry. She told officers that her daughter, who had gone on an overseas trip, could no longer be reached with trembling hands. And a voice full of fear, she begged the police to help find her. The missing woman was Maro Uchi, a senior college student. She had traveled to Taiwan earlier that month and was due to return to Japan on April 18th that morning. Hisako had gone to the airport to greet her, waiting for hours among the crowd of families and travelers, but Moro never appeared. When Hisako checked the flight records, she learned the plane had landed right on time, with no delays. That was the moment her heart sank. Something was terribly wrong. The police launched an immediate investigation. They confirmed that Moro had not canceled her flight, nor had she changed. There was no record of her boarding, and no entry stamped back into Japan. In other words, Maro never came home through tears. Hisako explained that she had last heard from her daughter on April 7th. Maro was a sensible young woman, not accustomed to traveling alone. Before she left, mother and daughter made a promise. Maro would send a postcard every day from Taiwan to let her mother know she was safe. 5 postcards arrived in total. The final one, dated April 7th, described Maro's plans to continue her journey south to Kaohsiung. After that, Salance Maro Iguchi was just 23 years old, born and raised in Tokyo. She had lived with her mother since her parents divorced when she was very young. Hisako worked long, difficult hours as an insurance salesperson, but she never failed to surround her only daughter with love, and Maro, in return, was a devoted, thoughtful child. She excelled in her studies, bringing pride to her family at Aoyama Gakuin Women's University. She quickly stood out. Her bright smile, short hair, and friendly personality won her many friends and the admiration of her professors, while her classmates were busy debating their graduation theses. Maro had already set her heart on something different. A graduation trip to Taiwan. Her plan was not simply sightseeing. She hoped to explore the culture up close, to gather experiences and stories that would inspire a unique and insightful thesis, full of hope and excitement. Moro boarded her flight, never imagining this journey would become a nightmare after the disappearance was reported. Tokyo police reached out to their counterparts in Taiwan through Interpol. Taiwanese authorities moved quickly. Immigration records showed Moro had entered the country on April 2nd, but there was no record of her ever leaving. Railway logs confirmed that on April 7th, she had boarded a train from Tainan to Kaohsiung. Arriving around noon, investigators focused their search on Kaohsiung. Missing person posters appeared across the city, describing the young Japanese student, 23 years old, 5 feet tall, with short hair, black-rimmed glasses, and a tiny mole at the corner of her mouth back in Tokyo. Hisako couldn't bear the weight. She flew to Taiwan herself, handing out flyers on the busy streets, pleading for information about her missing daughter, but there were no answers. Defeated, she returned to Japan, clinging to hope. As the police pressed forward, the case stirred deep public interest. Some feared Maro had been abducted by human traffickers. Others believed her gentle looks and naive charm may have drawn the attention of dangerous people. Rumors spread of criminal gangs and forced exploitation. Media outlets covered the mystery relentlessly, and pressure mounted on police to solve the case. Investigators scoured entertainment districts, searching night after night for any sign of Maro. Still, nothing emerged. Then, just as the trail seemed to vanish completely, an unusual figure stepped forward. A woman, claiming to be a psychic, approached police, using what she called her special abilities. She insisted Moro had been murdered, her body discarded in a lake or the sea, acting on the tip authorities turned their attention to Chenking Lake, a well-known artificial reservoir in Kaohsiung. Divers searched the waters for days, but all they recovered were animal remains and no trace of Moro, it seemed. The case had reached another dead end till a man named Mr. Lee came forward with an unexpected clue. He told police that on April 4th, near Tainan Station, he had met a young Japanese woman who appeared lost and anxious, concerned. He approached her to offer help. The young woman introduced herself as Moro. She explained she was traveling on a tight budget and asked if he knew of a cheap place to stay. Seeing her situation, Mr. Lee invited Moro to stay at his home. He had a spare bedroom and was happy to help. Grateful, Moro accepted his offer for the next 2 days. Mr. Lee not only offered Moro a place to stay, but also became her enthusiastic tour guide, riding together on his motorcycle. He showed her many of Tainan's most beloved sights, sharing stories about local history and culture along the way. From his account, Moro seemed to enjoy every moment, always smiling, always curious, and excited about each new experience. After spending 2 nights at Mr. Lee's home, Moro told him she planned to continue her journey south to Kaohsiung on the morning of April 7th. He drove her to Tainan Station and watched as she entered. Mr. Lee later recalled how lively and cheerful she seemed, and how much of a positive impression she had left not only on him, but on his entire family before leaving. Moro even wrote down her home address in Japan, saying she hoped they could keep in touch. When Mr. Lee handed that note to police, handwriting experts confirmed it was indeed written by Moro. The authorities then expanded their inquiry, speaking not only with Mr. Lee's relatives, but also with neighbors in the area. Every testimony matched his story. People confirmed seeing Moro at his home, staying for 2 days before leaving for Kaohsiung. Many described Mr. Lee as a generous man, well known in the community for his kindness and his willingness to help others to further prove his honesty. Mr. Lee told investigators that on the morning of April 7th, just before dropping Moro off at the station, he had stopped at a convenience store to buy her 2 bottles of water. When police questioned the store owner, he recalled the moment clearly. Mr. Lee purchasing drinks, and a beautiful young woman standing just behind him. With that memory, suspicions about Mr. Lee were laid to rest. Investigators then considered another possibility. After the warmth and generosity she had experienced in Tainan, perhaps Moro had become too trusting of strangers when she arrived in Kaohsiung. Her guard may have been lowered, making her vulnerable to people with darker intentions. Still, weeks passed, and the investigation seemed frozen, just as hope began to fade, and the case looked destined to go cold. Police received an anonymous letter. The writer described a taxi driver in Kaohsiung whose behavior had become increasingly strange. His car, the letter said, was covered with talismans and lined with Buddha statues across the dashboard. Even more disturbing, during the time Moro vanished, he had told several passengers, "I know where that Japanese girl is. I was the last one to see her acting on this tip." Investigators moved quietly, determined not to alert the suspect. A team of undercover officers was placed at Kaohsiung International Airport, where the man frequently waited for fares. His name was Lu. Colleagues described him as deeply eccentric. After Moro's disappearance, he had repeatedly brought her up, claiming to know her whereabouts. Then, as if haunted, he began filling his taxi with charms and religious symbols. He even confessed to other drivers that a female ghost was following him, seeking revenge. At first, many dismissed his talk as nonsense, but over time, his obsessive behavior unsettled those around him. People began whispering that an innocent man would not speak this way, that perhaps Lu was carrying a guilty secret. Background checks revealed Lu was 30 years old, the 3rd child in his family. He had 2 older sisters and a younger brother. Once, they had all lived together on Fuxin Road in Kaohsiung, but in time, his sisters married and moved away. His parents divorced, and his mother left with the youngest child. Lu's father later remarried, leaving Lu alone in the old family home. Still, Police proceeded with caution. Rumors and eccentric behavior were not enough for an arrest. They decided to approach his mother, hoping for more insight. Her words would deepen their suspicions. She revealed that just 6 months earlier, Lou had come to her demanding money to buy a house when she refused. He became furious. He threw a newspaper at her, pointing to an article about Morrow's disappearance, and shouted, "Do you see this missing woman? I killed her. I've already killed one person. I don't mind killing another." His mother admitted that at the time, she didn't take him seriously. She was accustomed to his angry outbursts, to his threats, and erratic behavior. Lou suffered from schizophrenia, acted on impulse, and had a history of violence. She had long since chosen to live apart from him, but only a few days after that chilling remark, he came to her again, this time, saying that a headless woman, dressed in white, was haunting him, coming to claim his life. And it was during that very period that the story of Morrow's disappearance dominated the headlines. Morrow's disappearance was all over the news. Her face appeared in newspapers and on television screens across Taiwan and Japan. Lou's mother, who had already revealed his violent temper, believed her son's ramblings about a ghost in white might have been nothing more than his illness triggered by seeing constant coverage of the missing Japanese student. But as police dug deeper into his background, disturbing details began. 2 surface neighbors described Lou as a strange, unpredictable man. They often heard him shouting to himself inside the house, as if arguing with unseen figures. He was known to have a cruel habit of torturing animals, and several locals had seen him carrying a crossbow, an illegal weapon that required a permit. Stray dogs and cats in the neighborhood often became his targets. These chilling accounts only strengthened the suspicion that Lou was more than just eccentric. When investigators brought him in for questioning, his behavior was erratic. He was visibly nervous, unable to maintain focus, and his answers veered into incoherent rambling. At one point, he even lashed out violently, attempting to strike the officers. This left police uncertain. Was he truly suffering from schizophrenia, or was he feigning instability to avoid suspicion? Recognizing the seriousness of the case, 2 months after Morrow's disappearance, authorities formed a dedicated task force, codenamed 0407. To continue the search, they issued posters across the country and offered a reward of 50,000 new Taiwan dollars, about $1,600, for any useful information. Morrow's mother, still unwavering in her determination, added her own contribution, 500,000 Japanese yen, roughly $4,500, but the search led only to dead ends. A report claimed that Morrow's body had been buried in a cemetery in Tainan's Shanhua district. Police combed through the area, but found nothing. Hasuko, however, refused to give up. She traveled frequently to Taiwan, handing out flyers and speaking to strangers. Convinced her daughter was simply lost and still alive, she even founded the Morrow Search Support Association to raise awareness. Months passed with no resolution to reignite leads. The reward was raised to 1 million new Taiwan dollars, over $30,000. Authorities declared they would find Morrow, alive or dead. Then, in January 1991, came what seemed like a breakthrough. A decomposed body was discovered in a sugarcane field in Kaohsiung's Hunai district. The remains matched Morrow's description. A forensic comparison with her dental records revealed the truth. It was not her. 2 months later, another tip surfaced. A taxi driver, who worked alongside Lou, came forward with alarming details. He told investigators that while Lou had once only filled his car with talismans and Buddha statues, now he played the Great Compassion mantra on loop every single day. He was so terrified he no longer slept at home, choosing instead to spend every night in his taxi. Even quick trips to the restroom ended with him sprinting back to his car, as if chased by something unseen. The driver suggested that a search of Lou's house might reveal the truth, yet without solid evidence, police could not obtain a warrant. The case seemed ready to stall again until a neighbor broke the silence. They reported that, on several nights, they had heard the sound of a woman crying inside Lou's house. The cries were so mournful, so chilling, That the neighbor eventually confronted him, Lou turned pale and said nothing. His silence, more telling than words, troubled. The neighbor finally approached police in March 1991. Authorities made their move. Lou was arrested on suspicion of murder, and a full search of his property was carried out in the backyard. Investigators found traces of fire. More unsettling still, a check of his water meter showed that in April 1990, when Morrow vanished, Lou's water usage had surged by over 1,300 gallons, a staggering amount for a man living alone. Police prepared to excavate the yard before digging. One veteran officer quietly folded his hands and prayed, asking Morrow's spirit to guide them to her resting place. Moments later, he felt a sudden, firm pat on his shoulder. He turned quickly, but no one was there. Shaken, he was convinced the young woman's spirit lingered nearby. After digging, the search revealed nothing. Meanwhile, Lou remained defiant when questioned. He hurled curses at investigators, insisting they were fools, accusing an innocent man, but detectives knew his deepest fear: ghosts. They pressed him relentlessly, leaning into his paranoia, reminding him of the spirits that might be waiting for him under mounting psychological pressure. Lou finally broke. His bravado crumbled, and he confessed piece by piece. He revealed the horrifying truth on April 7th, 1990, the day Morrow disappeared. Lou had been wandering aimlessly near Kaohsiung Station around noon. It was there that he first spotted her, alone and unaware that her journey was about to end in tragedy. Finding her attractive, he struck up a conversation. When he learned Morrow was Japanese, his interest grew even stronger during their chat. Lou quickly realized that Morrow was unfamiliar with Kaohsiung. Seizing this opportunity, he suggested taking her to Chengking Lake, a well-known scenic spot nearby. His offer sounded natural, as though it came from simple kindness and free time. Naively trusting, Morrow happily agreed. Perhaps she believed she had once again encountered a kind local, much like her earlier experiences on the way to the lake. Their conversations seemed lively and pleasant, which put Morrow at ease, completely unaware that she was walking into danger. When Lou learned she was still a college student, his desire for her only grew as night fell. Morrow asked if he knew of any cheap hotels, explaining that as a student, she had little money to lure her in. Lou lied, claiming hotels in Kaohsiung required reservations far in advance. Conveniently, he added that he had a spare room in his home where she could stay for free. Grateful and unsuspecting, Morrow accepted his offer and followed him home that evening. Lou carefully set the stage. He prepared a table full of food and bought a bottle of quality wine to entertain her. But after a few drinks, his demeanor changed. He attempted to become intimate with Morrow, but she firmly rejected him angrily. She pushed him away and stood to leave. Panicked, Lou lowered his head and apologized, claiming he had drunk too much. Reluctantly, Morrow stayed but immediately locked herself in the bedroom. As the night wore on, Lou's frustration grew darker. He convinced himself that Morrow was merely pretending to be innocent. By the early hours of the morning, an evil thought consumed him. He found the spare key to her room, armed himself with a crossbow, and silently opened the door inside. Morrow slept peacefully. Lou crept closer, aimed at her temple, and pulled the trigger. In an instant, the young woman's life was stolen in her sleep. Afterwards, Lou fetched a cleaver and began the gruesome process of dismembering her body. He wrapped the remains in blankets and disposed of them in scattered locations, along with the murder weapon. Realizing blood had soaked the floor and bed, he carried everything to his backyard and burned it to erase the evidence. When Lou later confessed the sequence of events to police, they were shocked. The bespectacled, seemingly mild-mannered man before them had carried out one of the most brutal crimes imaginable. Yet, despite his confession, neither Morrow's body nor the weapon had been recovered. This meant charges could not be solidified, and Lou cunningly exploited this fact. He continually lied about where he had discarded the remains, sometimes claiming Tainan, other times Kaohsiung, leading investigators in exhausting circles. Days dragged on. On March 8th, after hours of fruitless searching, Lou still refused to disclose the truth. Weary but determined, Police pressed on by late afternoon. Lou, hungry and thirsty, begged for a meal before continuing. The officers refused if he wanted to eat. He had to tell them the real locations cornered. Lou finally relented. He revealed that he had divided Morrow's remains into two parts. The body was buried near Chongqing, 13th Road in Tainan City, while her head had been discarded in a garbage heap on Nanmen Road. His reasoning was chilling. He deliberately transported the body to Tainan, knowing Morrow had earlier met a kind man, Mr. Lee, thereby leaving her remains nearby. He hoped to cast suspicion on Lee that night. Police went to the site Lou described, but more than a year had passed since the crime. The once empty lot on Chongqing, 13th Road had since become a parking area. Lou said he had buried the body beneath a large tree, but the tree had since been cut down. The roots, however, were still there. After digging, investigators uncovered more than 100 bone fragments. Forensic examination confirmed they belonged to a woman, aged between 23 and 25, approximately 5 feet tall. These details matched Morrow. Further analysis revealed knife marks on a shoulder blade, consistent with wounds inflicted by a cleaver, precisely as Lou had described. As for the head, police learned it had been transported with garbage to the Rend landfill in Tainan, but searching through years of refuse was like looking for a needle in a haystack. Layers of decayed waste had also produced dangerous levels of methane, making excavation hazardous. The search was eventually abandoned. When asked about the crossbow used in the murder, Lou claimed he had thrown it into the Love River in Kaohsiung. Lou told investigators that he had thrown the crossbow, the weapon he used to end Morrow's life, into the Love River in Kaohsiung. Divers were sent to search the waters, but despite days of effort, the weapon was never recovered without the head or the crossbow. The case still lacked certain critical pieces of evidence, yet the gruesome discovery of over 100 bone fragments beneath the old tree stump was enough to confirm the unimaginable truth. Forensic experts carefully examined the remains. The knife marks etched across the shoulder blade were clear, cruel proof of dismemberment. Consistent with Lou's chilling confession, the young woman who had once dreamed of a simple adventure abroad had been reduced to fragments. Scattered across 2 cities, the police pieced together the timeline. Morrow's kindness, her trust in strangers, and her cheerful, open nature had made her vulnerable. Lou, who had seemed so mild, polite, and harmless in appearance, had hidden a darkness so deep that even his neighbors and acquaintances could hardly believe what he had done. The man who once passed for an ordinary face in the crowd had revealed himself to be capable of an unspeakable crime. Yet the investigation still faced obstacles. Lu Shuang continued to shift his story, sometimes admitting details, sometimes twisting them, as if enjoying the control he still held. Police officers described him as cunning and manipulative, deliberately exhausting them with false leads, but persistence eventually broke through his walls. Bit by bit, the truth emerged, leaving no doubt that Morrow's final hours had been filled with betrayal and cruelty. The authorities, armed with his confession and the forensic confirmation of the remains, prepared to move forward with prosecution. But even as they did, many officers could not shake the image of the gentle-looking man with glasses, calmly describing how he had lured, killed, and dismembered a trusting young traveler for Moreau's family in Japan. The confirmation of her fate was devastating. The young woman who had set out with dreams of exploring the world, writing in her travel journal, and experiencing the kindness of strangers had instead encountered horror. Her story became a haunting reminder of the dangers that can lurk behind friendly smiles, and of how quickly trust can be shattered even if the police had known the exact location. Retrieving the weapon seemed almost impossible. The chances were slim, and most believed it would never be found. Yet, to everyone's astonishment, divers recovered the crossbow in less than a minute of entering the water. The speed was so unbelievable that even the officers themselves were stunned. When Morrow's mother, Hisako, returned once more from Japan after hearing the devastating news, her grief was overwhelming. Surrounded by those trying to comfort her, she wept, refusing to accept the truth. "This cannot be my daughter," she cried. Unwilling to provide a DNA sample, she pleaded instead. If the police could find her daughter's head, then only then would she believe that Morrow had truly left this world. But such a request placed the investigators in a difficult position. Searching for the missing skull would require enormous manpower and resources. With almost no chance of success, gently, the police explained the harsh reality to her, even taking her to the garbage dump to show her where her daughter's remains had likely been lost slowly. With great pain, Hisoko came to understand she no longer insisted on the impossible, but asked instead for something deeply human, for her daughter's personal belongings. When Morrow had set out for Taiwan, she carried a white backpack with an umbrella, a flashlight, and a few other small items. Hisoko said that if the police could return these things to her, she would provide her DNA sample. Investigators agreed, but they knew how unlikely it was when they questioned Liu again. He insisted he had already thrown the backpack into a nearby trash can, and that it would have been collected by sanitation workers long ago to him. This was a way to conceal the crime forever, but fate had other plans during an expanded inquiry. Officers interviewed local sanitation workers. One man, known as Mr. B, recalled something unusual in April 1990, around the time of Morrow's disappearance. He had come across a white backpack, discarded in a bin on Fiji Road. What struck him was that the bag looked brand new. Unlike the usual rubbish he collected. Curious, he opened it and found inside an unused umbrella and flashlight, both in perfect condition, believing it wasteful to throw away such items. He quietly took them home, and there they stayed, untouched, for years. When Mr. B handed the backpack and its contents over to police, Morrow's mother instantly recognized them at that moment. She understood her daughter was truly gone. Keeping her promise, she provided her DNA. The results confirmed what her heart already feared. The bone fragments belonged to Morrow. Aguchia. Year later, the Kaohsiung District Court opened the trial. Liu was charged with murder and abuse of a corpse. The court sentenced him to death, but due to his diagnosed mental illness, the punishment was reduced to life imprisonment, though he filed multiple appeals. All were rejected. The case was finally closed for Morrow's family. There was no closure. Her mother's pain remained, etched into her heart forever. Morrow's tragic story became both a cautionary tale of the risks faced by travelers and a grim reminder of the darkness that can hide behind an ordinary smile. Story to it was May 28, 2018, in the quiet village of Zhang Shandong Province, China. A man wandered along the banks of the Xian River, searching for a good fishing spot. As he walked, something unusual caught his eye: a large suitcase, swollen and drifting gently near the riverbank. The water was shallow, and the case looked relatively new. Perhaps, he thought, someone had dropped it by accident. Perhaps it contained something valuable, something worth keeping for viewers of true crime documentaries. Such a sight often signals something ominous, but for this man, the thought never crossed his mind. Eagerly, he waded into the water, dragging the heavy suitcase to shore. It felt weighted, promising something inside. He unzipped it partially and froze, wrapped tightly in layers of transparent plastic, bound with rubber bands. With something strange, curiosity overpowered hesitation, and he pulled the zipper open. Fully, the sight that met him was horrifying. With a panicked shout, he hurled both the suitcase and its plastic-wrapped contents in opposite directions. At around 3:30 p.m., police from Shandong province rushed to the riverbank. Officers secured the scene and took the man's trembling statement. Inside the suitcase was a body, curled unnaturally tight, already in an advanced state of decomposition, wrapped in several layers of transparent plastic. The body inside the suitcase told a chilling story. The first on-site examination revealed the victim was a woman, about 5'1" in height, weighing close to 99 pounds. Her hair, long and measuring nearly 18 inches, had been dyed a reddish brown, with fashionable blonde highlights brushed across the tips, styled in loose curls. Much of it had already fallen away. detaching in clumps after weeks in the water. She wore a white t-shirt with blue sleeves, the Adidas logo still visible across the chest. She was barefoot. On her neck were multiple sharp wounds, one of them deep enough, about 14 inches, to be declared the fatal injury. Decomposition made recognition impossible. No identification papers were found with the body, and forensic experts estimated she had been dead for around 45 days. Her age was placed between 25 and 29. The cuts were consistent with a dagger, and the prolonged submersion in river water had loosened her hair, fingernails, and toenails, leaving the body fragile and fragmented. The suitcase itself had preserved her better than expected. The layers of plastic had delayed some of the decay, but water had still seeped in, sealing her fate. The discovery site was east of Shang Village, along a quiet stretch of the Sion River. This lower course of the river flowed slowly, its current steady but not harsh, with depths of 8 to 16 feet, unlike the upper course, where sharp rocks and shallow rapids would have battered any object. This place was calm. The suitcase, still new and unmarked, bore no scratches or dents. Police quickly concluded it had not drifted downstream. It had been placed here deliberately. Search teams were deployed along the riverbank. Grass and thickets were cut back, every object floating in the current retrieved. The nearby dam was searched, too, but after 2 full days, no additional evidence surfaced. Officers then turned to the villagers. Some recalled seeing the suitcase in late April, floating quietly in the water, but they dismissed it as discarded trash. No one thought to report it reaching. This place was not easy. It lay far from the main road, hidden deep within Zhang Village and surrounded by other small communities. The route required a 6-mile drive from the highway, down narrow concrete lanes and uneven dirt roads to the task force. One thing was certain: whoever had disposed of the body either knew this terrain well or lived nearby. Investigators began their work household by household. Zhang Village was home to more than 2,000 people, and surrounding it were 21 other villages. Each was checked for missing residents, for signs of anyone who had vanished without reason. Nothing surfaced, so the search expanded outward, across Wang City and into neighboring regions, such as Juba and Donggan. Still, no reports matched the young woman in the suitcase. This absence raised a haunting question: if she had been dead for nearly a month and a half, why had no one searched for her? No family, no friends, no colleagues. It suggested she might have been an outsider, perhaps a laborer, a temporary worker, or someone living alone. With few close ties, investigators turned their focus to out-of-town workers, combing through lists of those who had suddenly quit their jobs or abandoned rented rooms without warning. Meanwhile, forensic technicians examined the suitcase itself. It measured 24 inches in length, and despite weeks underwater, the interior lining and the zipper of the inner pocket remained intact, almost brand new. Every inch was inspected, but fingerprints and traces of DNA had long since been washed away. The investigators knew the suitcase might hold silent answers. Even if water had washed away the obvious traces, they studied the stitching, the metal fastenings, the wheels, and even the faint factory stamps. What they found was subtle, but important. The design of the zipper and the fabric of the lining were not common in local markets. The suitcase had likely been purchased in a larger city, possibly from a higher-end department store. This clue, however small, hinted at the suspect's movement, suggested someone who had traveled, or at least had access to urban areas beyond Zhang Village. But for the investigation to move forward, the most crucial step remained unchanged. They needed to put a name to the body. The woman's hairstyle provided one of the first leads. The reddish-brown dye, combined with blonde highlights, was fashionable at the time, but not something commonly done in the smaller rural villages. Police began asking around at local salons, showing samples of similar coloring. A few stylists in Wang City recalled young women with similar hair, but none could remember someone who had stopped coming suddenly, nor anyone who matched the victim's small frame. Attention then turned to dental records. Though badly decomposed, her teeth were intact. showing several dental procedures had been performed, fillings, possibly some whitening treatments. This detail gave investigators a new direction. Someone with access to such care was likely from the city or working in an environment where appearance mattered. It also meant she had once sat in a dentist's chair. Lists of dental patients were requested from clinics across Wong City, a painstaking process in which officers compared records to the victim's unique dental structure. It was slow, methodical work, but progress was finally made. One set of records from a small private clinic in downtown Wang showed an almost perfect match. The name on file was Lin Mixu, a 27-year-old woman. She had visited the clinic the previous year for a cavity filling. Her listed address was a rental apartment in Wong City, though neighbors told police she had moved out suddenly in late March, around the very time forensic experts estimated her death. The confirmation was bittersweet at last. The victim had a name, but with that name came another question. What had led Lin Mixu, a young woman in her 20s, to end up bound in plastic, hidden in a suitcase, and left to sink into the quiet waters of the Sion River? Police began reconstructing her life, piece by piece. The four wheels of the suitcase showed almost no signs of wear. Investigators noted that the friction was minimal, suggesting the suitcase was practically brand new, likely purchased specifically to conceal the body and discard it in the river through the faint brand logo stamped on the suitcase. Police were able to trace it back to a factory that specialized in luggage, located in Changshangbing County, Hab Province. A team was immediately dispatched to the factory for answers. Factory manager confirmed that this model wasn't mass-produced in large numbers. Only 23 units of the exact same 24-inch size had ever been manufactured. All in March 2018, the news brought a measure of relief. If thousands of identical suitcases had been made, narrowing down the buyer would have been an almost impossible task, but with just over 20, the trail was suddenly far more manageable. According to shipment records, most of the 23 units had been sold in bulk to retail outlets, including some in Shandong. After cross-checking, investigators were able to account for 19 of them still on display in stores. 2 more had been sold directly to acquaintances of a shop owner. Both buyers still had the suitcases in their possession. That left only 2 units unaccounted for, sold individually to walk-in customers at a store in Guangwan County, Shandong Province. Police believed that the suitcase tied to the case was almost certainly one of these last 2. Unfortunately, the small retail shop had no surveillance cameras, and although the purchase had occurred within the past month, there was no way to identify the buyer. The store in Guangwan was about 43 miles from Zhuang village, where the body had been discovered. Investigators drew a straight line between the 2 points, treating it as a potential diameter of movement, and began working outward from there with the help of local police. They reviewed missing persons cases, interviewed business owners, and checked factories for workers who had quit suddenly. Yet no one matching the victim's description turned up, complicating matters. The Guangwan area was home to numerous large industrial parks, filled with migrant workers from other provinces. The pool of people to investigate was vast, and each lead seemed to dissolve into another dead end. Faced with mounting challenges, the task force made a bold and costly decision. After carefully studying the depth of the river and the disposal site, they resolved to block both ends of the section where the suitcase had been dumped and completely drain the water, hoping to uncover discarded evidence on the riverbed. It was a risky move, requiring excavators, 3 large pumps, and significant manpower, with no guarantee of results. But without it, the investigation risked collapsing entirely. While the draining operation got underway, officers fanned out to continue canvassing the area factories, rental homes, restaurants, shops, searching for any clue that could reveal the victim's identity. Finally, a promising lead emerged at a factory in Zhuang. Several workers mentioned a colleague who had recently disappeared. Her name was Yang Lin, a 28-year-old employee who, according to co-workers, suddenly stopped coming to work in early April and had not been reachable since she was described as having long brown dyed hair and standing. About 5 on details that closely matched the victim. Investigators ran her name and birth date through the national database and eventually located her in Hab province. It turned out she had left her job due to personal relationship troubles and moved back to her hometown, even changing her phone number. The abrupt move had led her co-workers to believe she had gone missing, although Yang Lin was safe. This dead end gave way to a new, unsettling lead. Not long before, villagers had reported that a hot spring bath, a thriving business, had abruptly shut down around mid-April. The owner had moved everything out overnight, vanishing without explanation. Locals also recalled that the cashier, a young woman named Lan, around 26 or 27 years old, 5'3" inches tall, with brown hairs streaked with blonde highlights, had stopped showing up for work. Regular customers remembered something else. Shortly before disappearing, Lan had been overheard having a heated argument over the phone after that day. She was never seen at the bathhouse again. This new lead shifted the entire investigation. The sudden closure of the hot spring bathhouse, the mysterious overnight move by its owner, and the disappearance of the cashier, known only as Lan Painted. A troubling picture. Villagers remembered her. Clearly she was polite, soft-spoken, and always neatly dressed. Her hair, a deep brown with striking blonde highlights, left an impression on those who saw her often at the cashier's desk. But just as the bathhouse shut down, she was gone. No farewell, no forwarding contact. The timing was more than a coincidence. It aligned almost perfectly with the estimated time of death. Detectives quickly began digging into the bathhouse records, searching for the identity of this Land. Unfortunately, official employment contracts were murky. The bathhouse had been run more like a family business, often paying staff in cash without strict registration. Still, through utilities, vendor receipts, and personal accounts, investigators managed to identify the owner. A man in his early 40s, known locally as Mr. Jojo, had operated the hot spring for nearly 4 years. But his reputation was mixed. Some villagers described him as hard-working and entrepreneurial, while others hinted at a temper and whispered that his dealings with women were questionable. Most alarming was the fact that he had vanished at the same time as his cashier. No one in Zhang village had seen him since mid-April, and his former property stood abandoned, its windows boarded and its doors chained shut as investigators pieced together the last known days of the bathhouse's operations. One detail stood out. Several customers remembered overhearing Lan on the phone days before her disappearance. She wasn't her usual calm self. Her voice was sharp, tense, and emotional. Witnesses recalled fragments of her words. "I won't do this anymore. Why are you treating me this way?" The conversation had ended, with her slamming the phone down. Pale and visibly shaken, detectives now faced 2 chilling possibilities. Either Lan had fled after a personal conflict and simply vanished into another city, or she was the very woman they had pulled from the river. When the police first reached out to the hot spring bathhouse owner, Lu Yan, hoping for his cooperation in learning more about the cashier and the activities leading up to the closure, his reaction was telling. The moment he realized he was speaking with the authorities, Lu grew defensive, even irritated, before abruptly cutting off the call. From then on, he ignored every further attempt the police made to contact him. Investigators decided to approach him directly. They traced his residence to Daegang village, just 9 miles from Zhang, but when officers arrived at his home, they were met with silence and suspicion. Lu was guarded, uncooperative, and unwilling to answer even the simplest of questions. Digging into his records, police uncovered an unsettling history. Lu had a criminal past that included theft charges, most of them tied to gambling debts. He was divorced, his children living with their mother, and though the bathhouse had been generating steady income, his gambling habit drained whatever stability he had. Rent, daily expenses, even child support. He was always struggling to keep up with this background. Police flagged him as a high-risk suspect. He eventually took a court-ordered mandate to force Lou to comply with questioning when he finally sat down with investigators. He explained his reluctance. He admitted that over the years he had been fined multiple times for everything from theft to violations connected with the operation of his bathhouse. This, he said, made him distrustful of law enforcement as for why he closed the bathhouse. Lou claimed it had nothing to do with the case. He insisted he was simply behind on rent. In fact, he revealed that he still owed his cashier, Lan, several weeks of wages just before the closure. Lan had argued bitterly with him over the money, according to Lou. She had even taken that day's earnings to cover the debt before quitting and leaving town to back this up. He handed over employment records with Lan's contact information when police tracked her down. They confirmed that Lan was alive and had since taken another job elsewhere with that. Two of their suspected missing persons, the bathhouse owner and his cashier, were accounted for, yet the body in the suitcase remained unidentified. Work at the river continued after 4 grueling days. Nearly 40,000 cubic meters of water had been drained from that section of the Sion River. The riverbed finally began to emerge, thick with heavy mud near the banks. Officers could wade in and search directly, but in deeper areas, where the mud was unstable, they laid wooden planks across the surface, sifting slowly and carefully with shovels and farming tools. Then came the breakthrough. About 100 feet downstream from where the suitcase had first been found, police uncovered a scattered collection of personal items: a key, a single blue sandal, 2 pairs of socks, a pair of earphones, a quilted leather handbag with a metal strap, still fairly new, a pink comb, a pair of sunglasses, and most importantly, some bank cards. Not all of these things could be tied to the victim. Of course, some might have been discarded by others into the river over the years. But the bank cards held promise. Police quickly sent them to the issuing banks for verification. What they discovered would change the course of the investigation. Every card belonged to a 29-year-old woman named Wu Yena from Mzhou village in Shandong province. The ID photo attached to her account showed her in a thin red jacket, a white t-shirt with blue sleeves, the same style and color of the shirt worn by the woman pulled from the river. Authorities moved fast. They reached out to Wu's parents and conducted a DNA comparison. The result was conclusive. The victim in the suitcase was Wu. Yenua family was devastated. They explained that Wu had once been married, but constant conflict and harsh treatment from her in-laws drove her to divorce in 2013. Since then, she had lived independently, often traveling for work and sending money home to her parents. She had no children, no desire to remarry, and cherished her freedom. But this independence came with strain. Her relatives pressured her constantly about settling down, sometimes arranging blind dates she never wanted. Over time, Wu began to avoid returning home, even during the Lunar New Year, instead sending money and calling her parents by phone for her family. Her absence had become almost expected. She was usually the one to initiate contact, so when weeks passed without a word, they hadn't realized something was terribly wrong. Now, confronted with the truth, her parents could scarcely believe it. Their daughter had not only been murdered, but discarded in the river like something disposable. Tracing her last known movements, police discovered that Wu had not been living in June, where her body was found, but had recently been working at a factory in Guangyuan County, Shandong. In a chilling detail, it was in this same county that stores had sold the exact type of suitcase matching the one recovered from the river. With these threads coming together, investigators knew they were closing in on the truth. They returned to Guangyuan and visited the factory where Wu had worked. Records showed she had been officially dismissed on April 25th. Her contract terminated because company policy required dismissal after 7 consecutive days of unexplained absence. The factory's attendance logs told investigators a grim story. Wu Yan had last been present at work on April 17th. From that day forward, she never signed in again. At first, her employer assumed she had taken time off without notice, but when a full week passed without word, her absence triggered the company's policy: automatic dismissal after 7 consecutive days of no attendance. On April 25th, Her employment was formally terminated. This timeline matched chillingly well with the medical examiner's report, which estimated that Wu Yan had been killed sometime in mid to late April. The alignment was too precise to ignore whatever fate had befallen her. It had happened shortly after she left the factory for the last time. Digging deeper, police interviewed several of Wu Yan's former colleagues. Many described her as polite, hardworking, and reserved, but some also mentioned that she often appeared burdened with private troubles she rarely opened up, though one colleague recalled that Wu Yan had recently been distressed over a financial matter. Another coworker remembered seeing her step outside during breaks to take phone calls, sometimes speaking in a hushed but agitated tone. The most telling lead came from a factory security guard. He recalled an incident just days before. Wu Yan stopped showing up for work on the evening of April 16th. A man had come to the factory gates, asking for her. He was described as being in his 30s, average build, wearing a dark jacket, and carrying what looked like a satchel. Wu Yan met him outside the gate and spoke with him for nearly 20 minutes. The guard noted that their conversation appeared tense, with Wu Yan shaking her head repeatedly before walking back inside. That was the last time he ever saw her. Investigators now had a possible sighting of someone connected to her disappearance. But who was this man? A relative? An acquaintance? Or something far more sinister? Meanwhile, forensic teams worked through the personal belongings recovered from the river. Among the items found inside the quilted leather handbag, they discovered not only Wu Yan's bank cards, but also several ATM receipts dated within days of her disappearance. The withdrawals had been made in Guangyuan County near her factory, suggesting that someone had access to her bank account. Even after she vanished, this revelation pushed the case into a new phase. If money had been the motive, then whoever last used those cards could very well be the killer. In November 2018, the court handed down the death penalty to Su Meng. It was the ultimate punishment for a crime born out of insecurity, selfishness, and possessive obsession. Wu Yan's story is a tragic reminder of how love, when twisted into control, can turn deadly. She endured constant arguments and carried the weight of responsibility, hoping her partner would change, but instead of reflecting on his failures, Su Meng blamed her, believing that her desire to leave him meant she wanted someone else. In his rage and fear of abandonment, he chose murder. He claimed that this crime was fueled by love is hollow. It was never love, it was possession. True love wants the other person to live, to thrive, to be free. It does not bind them in control or punish them for wanting to move. And each person has their own inner world, their own struggles, their own dreams. To impose our will on someone else, under the pretense of caring, is not affection, it's domination. Wu Yan's life was stolen by someone who could not accept her choice to walk away. And in the end, his inability to let go cost him his own life. Story 3. Late at night, on July 13, 2002, in a quiet village in Jiangxi province, the sound of cicadas filled the humid summer air. Most families had already retreated indoors, their lights flickering dimly behind thin curtains. But at around 11:30 p.m., a piercing scream shattered the stillness. When neighbors rushed outside, they saw smoke rising from a small farmhouse at the edge of the village. Flames licked at the wooden beams, and within moments, the home was engulfed, despite their frantic efforts, with buckets of water. The blaze consumed the structure far too quickly. By the time firefighters arrived, the house had already collapsed inward. Inside the charred ruins, they discovered the remains of 3 people, a middle-aged man, his wife, and their teenage daughter. The family had been known as quiet, hard-working, and without enemies, making the tragedy seem at first like a terrible accident. But investigators soon noticed something odd. While the fire appeared intense, the victims' bodies bore unusual wounds. The husband had deep cuts to his head, the wife's arms showed defensive injuries, and the daughter's remains suggested she had been struck before the flames reached her. The fire, it seemed, was not the cause of death. It was a cover-up. As police began piecing together the family's final hours, whispers spread through the village. Some believed it was a robbery gone wrong, Others suggested something far darker, an act of vengeance, carefully planned by someone the family may have known. What investigators would soon uncover was a chilling story of betrayal, greed, and a killer who thought fire could erase the truth. January 25, 1981, Toa Payoh, Singapore. The quiet streets of Toa Payoh were cloaked in darkness at around 2:20 a.m. A weary carpenter was making his way home after catching a late-night movie. His destination was Building 12, one of the many high-rise residential blocks in the areas. He passed Building 11. Something caught his attention near the stairwell, a large, brand-new brown leather duffel bag. During Singapore's economically difficult early 1980s, such an item was rare and valuable. To see it abandoned in the middle of the night, in a deserted public space, was deeply unusual. Curious, and thinking it might be someone's forgotten belongings, the carpenter cautiously approached. He bent down, pulled the zipper open, and peered inside. What he saw made his blood run cold. In the dim moonlight, he could make out black strands of hair and the pale form of a human arm. Shocked and horrified, he dropped the bag immediately. Its contents shifted, revealing more of what lay within. Terrified, the carpenter ran straight to the nearest police station to report what he had found. Within minutes, investigators arrived. When they unzipped the bag fully, their worst fears were confirmed. Inside was the intact body of a young girl. The victim's face bore bruises around her nose and mouth. Her knees showed fresh injuries, as though she had struggled, but otherwise, the body appeared untouched. At the bottom of the bag lay a small pair of children's clogs. The child's body was still warm, with no signs of rigor mortis, meaning her death had occurred less than 2 hours earlier. She wore a yellow uniform and had short hair. The medical examiner's initial conclusion was suffocation. The killer had forcibly covered her nose and mouth until she could no longer breathe. There were also clear indications of sexual assault. Police quickly cross-referenced recent missing persons reports. Their search led them to a name, Agnes Ng Soo Hock. Just 9 years old, she had vanished 10 hours earlier. Agnes had last been seen on January 24th, around 4 p.m., near a church not far from her school. She had been walking home with her older sister, when the sister remembered she had left something behind in the classroom. She told Agnes to wait outside while she ran back, but when she returned, Agnes was gone. At first, the sister thought Agnes had simply walked ahead, but when she reached home and her younger sister wasn't there, panic set in. Their parents immediately retraced the route, searching frantically near the church and schoolyard. Hours passed, with no sign of Agnes. By nightfall, they had no choice but to alert the police. 10 hours later, the little girl's body was discovered, stuffed inside a leather duffel bag, less than a mile from where she was last seen. At that time, forensic technology was limited. There were no surveillance cameras, no DNA testing, and frustratingly, the leather bag yielded no usable fingerprints. No one had seen who left it. By the stairwell, leads seemed to evaporate into the night, but before police could make progress, something chilling happened. Less than a week after Agnes's death, the Ng family received a phone call. On the other end was a woman's voice. She threatened that Agnes's older sister would be the next victim, and then she went further. She described details of Agnes' murdered, tales that had never been made public. The call was received by Agnes's mother. Imagine, for a moment, the unbearable pain of a grieving mother being forced to listen to her child's killer describe the intimate horrors of her daughter's final moments. Yet she couldn't hang up. The woman was threatening her surviving daughter's life. The only thing she could do was listen. The family reported the call immediately. Police traced it, though in 1981, the process was agonizingly slow. After half a day, they determined the call had come from a public phone booth located between buildings 10 and 11. This suggested the killer was someone who not only knew the family's phone number, but also knew intimate details about them, including the fact that Agnes had a sister. And then, before investigators could catch their breath, the killer struck again. On the morning of February 7th, 1981, just 2 weeks after Agnes's murder, Another body was found. This time, it was a boy 10-year-old Ghazi bin Maud Marzuki, discovered lying face up on the grass in front of Building 10 in Toapeo. He was dressed in light blue clothes. His body was still warm, indicating death within the last 5 hours. His injuries told a disturbing story. There were 3 burn marks across his back, inflicted after death. His right index finger bore a deep cut. Though the blood had been carefully washed away, the autopsy revealed the true cause of death: drowning, but not in a river, canal, or reservoir. The signs suggested drowning in a small, confined space, likely a bathtub or water tub. Ghazi had been last seen alive just the evening before, at 6 p.m. He had been playing outside with his cousins when a woman approached them, asking for help loading items into a car. Ghazi, the oldest and kindest of the children, agreed to help. He never came back. Now his body lay discarded in front of a housing block, with telltale burns and cuts meant to disguise the real cause of death. But there was one detail the killer missed. Investigators noticed faint pink stains near the boy's nose. It was diluted blood, mixed with water, consistent with drowning. Following this trace, police widened their search, and then they found a faint trail of watery, pink blood drops leading away from the body. They followed it carefully. 20 meters away, more drops appeared. Then another patch, slightly fresher. The trail wound into the stairwell of Building 12 step by step. Police climbed, tracing the droplets upward. They grew more concentrated between the 5th and 6th floors, then again between the 6th and 7th. Finally, on the 7th floor corridor, the trail stopped right in front of an apartment door. At that exact moment, a man in a shirt and trousers stepped out. As if preparing to leave, he closed the door behind him, only to find police officers waiting. When questioned, he seemed calm, but officers had already surrounded the building. The trail of watery blood connected directly to his doorway, and inside that flat, investigators would soon uncover one of Singapore's darkest and most disturbing child murder cases. Discovered that the entire 7th floor of the building had only one apartment, belonging to a man named Adrian Lim. Witnesses had already suggested that the murderer might be a woman, which raised the question, was there a woman living in this apartment with him? Further investigation revealed that Adrian Lim, 39, was already facing a rape charge that was still under review. He was out on bail, awaiting trial. The blood trail leading directly to his door made police suspicious, but what shocked them more was learning that Lim shared his apartment with 2 women, his wife, Tan Mui Si Chu, and his lover, Ho Ka Hung. Armed with a search warrant, police entered the flat. The scene inside was bizarre. Right by the entrance stood a mixed-style altar, a strange blend of religious icons. There were crosses, Hindu figurines, and Chinese statues arranged together. But the most disturbing detail was the fresh smears of red coating the statues. To the investigators, it looked like blood, possibly from Ghazali's wounds. Lim insisted it wasn't blood at all, but melted red candle wax he had imported from China for ritual use. Police pressed deeper into the flat. In the kitchen, they noticed stains on the floor. Lim claimed he had slaughtered a chicken there for Chinese New Year, but rapid forensic tests confirmed the truth. The blood was human. The more they searched, the darker the discoveries became. Blood-soaked slippers, stained shorts and handkerchiefs, a woman's robe, half-washed, still floating in a bucket. The marks of blood clinging stubbornly to the fabric. The apartment looked less like a home and more like a gruesome crime scene. Then came the most chilling find. Among the clutter were anesthetic drugs and a syringe, still filled with blood, believed to belong to Ghazali. A clump of hair, long and soft, was discovered stuffed beneath the carpet and sofa cushions. It, too, appeared to be hers. Inside the refrigerator, officers found rows of vials, each filled with blood, and tucked into a phone book was a slip of paper with 2 names written on it, Agnes and Ghazali. Agnes had already been identified earlier that morning, and now, seeing Ghazali's name, investigators knew without doubt that the occupants of this apartment were fully aware of the murders. A neighbor living on the 5th floor later gave a statement. He recalled that at around 2 a.m. on February 7th, as he was returning from a night shift, he saw Lim and his wife coming down from the 7th floor. Tan was carrying a boy, around 9 or 10 years old. His head resting drowsily on her shoulder. Lim walked alongside them. Both left the building together, and were last seen heading in the direction of blocks 10 and 11 shortly after. Police moved in. Lim, Tan, and Ho were all arrested and charged with murder. The evidence against them was overwhelming. Their defense lawyers understood there was little point in denying the physical evidence, so instead they argued insanity. They claimed that these gruesome acts stemmed from the trio's unstable mental health. After all, what kind of man could live harmoniously under the same roof with both a wife and a mistress? Surely, they said, this was proof of a disturbed mind. The defense also pointed out another unusual detail. The bodies of the victims had all been dumped within 200 meters of the apartment. Typically, killers went to great lengths to dispose of remains far away from their homes to avoid suspicion here. The closeness suggested something irrational, almost self-destructive. Psychiatric evaluations painted a different picture. Experts found that Adrian Lim was fully aware of his actions. Far from insane, he was manipulative, cunning, and skilled at exerting psychological control over those around him. His wife and lover did show signs of emotional vulnerability, but they were not detached from reality. They knew what they were doing and understood the consequences. Tan herself admitted that she accepted this unusual living arrangement because Lim provided her with comforts, money, luxuries, and unlimited shopping. Ho, on the other hand, confessed that she believed Lim possessed supernatural powers, and that both women worshipped him almost like a saint. Their devotion to him meant they would obey any command without question. The investigation lasted 41 days, carefully piecing together evidence, testimony, and background. Lim himself proved difficult, answering only the questions he chose to, and remaining silent on others. His statements were inconsistent, often shifting blame onto his wife and lover. Tan and Ho, meanwhile, insisted that they acted out of fear and out of blind belief in Lim's supposed powers. As detectives built their case, a disturbing portrait of Adrian Lim began to take shape. He was born on January 6, 1942, the eldest son in a middle-class family. On the surface, he appeared intelligent, but his childhood was far from stable. Teachers described him as quiet and shy, yet beneath that stillness burned a violent temper. The smallest provocation could send him into fits of rage, a troubling sign noticed early by those around him. Although academically gifted, Lim quickly lost interest in school. By the equivalent of grade 8, he dropped out entirely, forced to make his own living through odd jobs in his youth. He briefly worked as an informant for internal security, gaining early insight into police operations. Later, in 1962, he joined Rediffusion Singapore, first as an electrician, then as a bill collector. The steady job satisfied him for a while, and he remained there for several years. In April 1967, Lim married his childhood sweetheart to do so. He even converted to Catholicism. Together, they had 2 children by then. Lim had managed to save enough money to purchase a 7th-floor flat in Block 12 at Toa Payoh. Outwardly, he seemed to have achieved stability, a job, a home, a family, but inside, something darker was stirring. For all the appearance of a simple, modest life, Lim craved something else: fame, power, and control. Desires that, with his limited education and modest career, were far out of reach. And so, behind closed doors, he began to chase them through rituals, manipulation, and eventually murder. Over time, that yearning for power and recognition began to eat away at Adrian Lim. Outwardly, he remained a man of modest means, a husband and father holding down a steady job, but inside, he grew restless, convinced he was destined for something greater than the ordinary life he had built. By the mid-1970s, Lim's fascination with the occult and mysticism had taken hold. He immersed himself in rituals, amulets, and teachings drawn from a mix of faiths. What began as curiosity soon evolved into obsession. He started conducting spiritual sessions at his apartment, offering blessings, cures, and charms to those who believed in his so-called powers. People in the neighborhood whispered about him. Some were skeptical, but others troubled, desperate, or simply superstitious sought his help. Lim fed on this attention every time someone came to him for guidance. It confirmed his growing belief that he was more than an ordinary man at home. His double life deepened. While married to Tan Mui Shou, he also pursued other women. His charm, confidence, and claims of supernatural abilities drew them in. One of those women was Ho Ka-hong, who eventually moved into the same flat with Lim and his wife. Two outsiders. This arrangement seemed bizarre, even scandalous, but Lim managed to maintain it. Under the guise of harmony, he provided Tan with material comfort, stability, and status, while Ho was entranced by his charisma and his supposed connection to the spiritual world. What neither woman realized was that Lim's obsession with control was growing darker. He had learned to manipulate, to twist their fears and insecurities into loyalty. He spoke of visions, of powers beyond the human realm, and both women believed. They submitted to him not only out of fear, but out of a misplaced reverence behind closed doors. The apartment became a shrine and a prison. Religious icons from different faiths filled the living room. Their surfaces smeared with wax and blood. Rituals were performed late at night, and in those shadows, Lim's ambitions and his crimes continued to escalate, but also became the key tools in maintaining his fraudulent empire. Both women, broken and manipulated, were kept under his control through fear, lies, and constant psychological abuse. Lim convinced them that they were spiritually bound to him, that, if they ever tried to leave, dark forces would curse them, bringing endless suffering or even death to outsiders. Lim projected the image of a mysterious and powerful spiritual master. His apartment became a strange mix of a fortune-telling den and a shrine, cluttered with charms, amulets, foreign language spellbooks, and grotesque statues. Clients often entered in fear, seeking protection, and left even more deeply entangled in his web of lies. But, behind closed doors, the reality was far more disturbing. Lim used sex, money, and fabricated spiritual rituals to maintain control. Tan and Ho, though initially victims, slowly became accomplices under his manipulation, helping to lure vulnerable people into his scams. One of Lim's most profitable tricks was convincing women that they were cursed with bad luck in love or fertility. He claimed that intimate contact with him, rituals disguised as sacred healing, would restore balance and bring them happiness. For years, dozens of women fell victim to this deception, never realizing they were being exploited. By the mid-1980s, Lim's reputation had spread beyond his village and into the city. Some saw him as a healer. Others whispered that he was dangerous, a man who had crossed into dark, forbidden magic. Yet no one dared speak against him openly, for fear of curses or retaliation. Still, police quietly began noticing troubling reports. A handful of unexplained deaths surrounded Lim, always framed as accidents, electrocution, sudden illness, or mysterious fainting spells. Each time, Lim provided spiritual explanations, and his followers accepted them without question. What no one yet realized was that Lim's obsession with power was escalating, and soon, he would cross a line that would expose the true extent of his darkness. Lim's control over Tan and Ho was absolute. They weren't just victims of his manipulation. They were also tools in his schemes. He relied on them to convince female clients to sleep with him, framing it as part of his spiritual healing rituals. When persuasion failed, Lim resorted to something darker. He would slip sedatives into the drinks of women he desired, then exploit them once they were unconscious. Medical records later showed that Lim visited his clinic more than 40 times in a single year, requesting hormone injections to heighten his sexual stamina. His predatory appetite was insatiable. On October 19, 1980, less than a year before the first child murder, Lim set his sights on a woman named Lucy, a door-to-door saleswoman who came to his home to demonstrate beauty products to his wife. Lim was immediately drawn to her and tried his usual deception, telling Lucy she was haunted by an evil spirit. He offered to chase it away through his rituals, but Lucy saw through the act and refused. Lim was not used to rejection. Enraged, he laced her drink with 2 capsules of Dalmador, a powerful sedative. He instructed Tan to offer it to Lucy. She unsuspectingly drank, soon collapsed, and Lim assaulted her while she lay unconscious. Lucy did not remain silent. She went to the police, who arrested Lim, but Lim was a skilled manipulator. He claimed the encounter had been consensual, portraying himself as nothing more than a womanizer, and accusing Lucy of lying out of jealousy. Both Tan and Ho, under his spell, testified on his behalf. Shockingly, the case against him collapsed, and the scandal only fed his ego. But the rape case drew intense public scrutiny for the first time. Lim felt the threat of exposure to deflect suspicion and divert attention. He turned to something unimaginably darker. Lim had studied esoteric texts, convinced that the sacrifice of children would appease a wrathful goddess and shield him from police investigations. He told Tan and Ho that only through such sacrifices could his power grow and his enemies be destroyed. The women, consumed by blind faith, agreed to help. Their first victim was 9-year-old Agnes, abducted while waiting for her sister outside school. Lim forced the girl to swallow sedatives, then violated her when she regained consciousness. The terrified child was suffocated, her tiny body stuffed into a leather bag and abandoned near a staircase. The community was horrified. Newspapers carried the story of the brutal child killing, and Tan even called Anis's family with cruel threats, deepening the family's grief for Lim. This tragedy served its purpose. The scandal about his rape allegations faded into the background, buried beneath the shock of the child's death. But one child was not enough. Weeks later, they selected another victim. A young boy named Ghazali. Ho approached him as he played with cousins, luring him away under the pretense of needing help. Once in Lim's apartment, the boy was drugged, tied, and strapped to an electric chair. Lim cut the child's hand, drinking his blood in a grotesque ritual. Before drowning him in a bathtub, the boy's lifeless body was placed before an altar, as Tan and Ho assisted in carrying out the ritual. At dawn, Lim and Tan dumped Ghazali's body, but this time they made a critical mistake. Blood dripped from the boy's nose, leaving a trail. Police followed straight to Lim's apartment, May 25, 1983. After months of gathering evidence, all 3 were arrested in court. Experts confirmed that none of them were insane or incapable of understanding their actions. Each was sentenced to death. Tan and Ho accepted their punishment silently, eventually showing remorse. Ho asked to be baptized, while Tan spent her final days in prayer. But Lim never repented. He laughed in court, boasting that he had no regrets and no fear of execution. In November 1988, all 3 were hung. The case shocked Singapore to its core, only for the brutality of the murders, but for the chilling way Lim manipulated those around him. He turned religion, fear, and blind faith into weapons, convincing 2 women to help him commit unspeakable crimes. Police quickly secured the scene and began a careful investigation. The body had been discovered at the base of Mount Shihar, a remote area without streetlights, bordered by thick woods, and far from any homes aside from the occasional passing truck. It was an unusually quiet stretch of road. The small roadside parking area was mostly known to hikers, who used it as a starting point for the nearby trail. A modest sign at the lot read, "Ichihara cares for you. Please do not litter and keep the area clean." The lot contained 4 storm drains, each about 25 inches wide and nearly 7 feet deep. The victim's body was pulled from one of these drains because it had collected a large amount of rainwater. The fire department had to assist the police in recovering her remains. At first glance, the young woman wore the blue uniform of a glass manufacturing company. But what truly drew attention was the head wound, evidence that her death was unlikely to have been an accident. Sanitation workers explained that heavy rain days earlier had caused the drains to fill with murky water. That morning, while cleaning them, their pump became blocked. When they tried to investigate, they stumbled upon the body. The police worked well into the afternoon, draining the water and searching the drain thoroughly. At the bottom, they found several personal items: a mascara, stick, a car key, and, disturbingly, an iron hammer around the manhole. Investigators noted bloodstains, a clump of brown hair, a single woman's glove, and a pair of shoes spattered with blood. The victim's mobile phone was missing, the location complicated. Matters no security cameras overlooked the road, but even without footage, the scene itself told a grim story. The woman had been attacked, struck with a blunt object, and then dumped into the drain. The missing phone and documents suggested a deliberate effort to hide her identity. Forensics confirmed that the victim had suffered a blunt force head injury. Her hands showed defensive wounds, signs she fought back ultimately. Her cause of death was drowning. The estimated time of death was around 8 p.m. the previous evening. June 11th, DNA testing identified her as Ogawa Tenko, a 28-year-old woman reported missing by her mother. She had last been seen leaving work on June 10th. Ogawa was an only child, quiet and hardworking, who lived with her parents in Nagahama City. She had spent the last 7 years employed at a local glass manufacturing company, where she was well liked for her patience and professionalism through her own efforts. She had even managed to purchase a car, which she drove to and from work every day on the morning of June 10th. Her car unexpectedly broke down, not wanting to be late. She asked her mother to drive her in at the end of her shift. She told her mother she would take a taxi home instead, but that evening came and went, with no word from her. Calls went unanswered, and by the next day her co-workers confirmed she hadn't appeared at work, either. Alarmed, her mother filed a missing persons report. Tragically, within hours, her body was discovered in the drain. Her devastated parents described her as a thoughtful and dutiful daughter who lived simply. Her life was split between work and home. She had no conflicts with others, and they could not understand why anyone would want to harm her. Piecing together the timeline, police determined Ogawa was likely attacked after work on June 10th. At first she may only have been unconscious when placed in the drain, but she regained awareness. Trapped in filthy water with no way out, rainfall caused the water level to rise through the following day, and by the evening of June 11th, she tragically drowned. Investigators returned to her workplace, where colleagues described her as diligent and highly responsible. One co-worker, Kyoko, provided an intriguing detail. On the evening of June 10th, as she was preparing to leave, she noticed Ogawa lingering, anxiously looking at her phone. She seemed to be texting someone when Kyoko called out. Ogawa brushed it off, saying she had something personal to handle and would leave later. That detail changed everything. Whoever she had been in contact with that night could hold the key to the mystery, but with her phone missing, finding that person would prove a difficult task. Yuna was devastated when she heard that her dear friend had gone missing, and even more so when the possibility arose that Marita Banjo, the man Ogawa Tenko loved so deeply, might be involved. To her, it suddenly made sense. The outbursts of anger, the emotional manipulation, the physical violence, these were red flags she had warned Tenko about, and yet Tenko had always held on to hope that Marita would change. The police now had a clearer picture. Ogawa Tenko was entangled in a turbulent and secret relationship with a married man who carefully balanced two lives, one as a respected family man, and another as a controlling lover who refused to let go. But suspicion alone wasn't enough. Investigators needed evidence. They looked deeper into the surveillance footage, this time extending the timeline. On the night of June 10th, just after Ogawa was last seen leaving work, another camera positioned at the edge of the company's parking lot captured what seemed to be her figure entering a car. The vehicle was registered to none other than Marita Banjotha. Discovery was alarming. If Ogawa had willingly entered his car that night, it meant she was with him at the time of her disappearance. The police discreetly tracked Marita's movements. In the following days he continued his routine flawlessly: work, family, neighborhood duties. But as investigators dug into his phone records, they uncovered something chilling: multiple calls between him and Ogawa on June 10th, the day she vanished. After that date, however, There was a sudden and permanent silence. This aligned disturbingly well with Nami's account. On June 11, when she tried to call Ogawa, a man answered the phone and quickly hung up. Police now suspected it wasn't a stranger, it was Marita himself. Still, he faced a daunting challenge. Marita had no prior criminal record, was widely respected, and appeared unshakably calm under scrutiny, without concrete evidence tying him directly to Ogawa's disappearance. Her possible murder, the case risked collapsing into speculation behind the facade of the kind husband and devoted father. However, cracks began to show. Investigators learned from Ogawa's confidant, Yuna, that Tenko had planned to confront Marita about ending their relationship shortly before she went missing. Yuna recalled her saying, "If he doesn't change this time, I can't keep doing this. I need to move on." For detectives, this statement was crucial. They theorized that Ogawa's attempt to break free may have triggered Marita's rage, pushing him to silence her permanently. But if Marita truly killed Ogawa, Tenko, where was her body? Marita Banjo was not a man without flaws. Friends and acquaintances told police that while he could appear polite and controlled, his moods were highly unstable. He was prone to bursts of anger, and when pushed, he sometimes lashed out in extreme ways. Because of this, investigators saw him as the one person with a clear motive. According to Yuna, Ogawa, Tenko's closest friend, Tenko had been entirely unaware that Marita was married. She believed that when she finally discovered the truth, she may have confronted him, and perhaps even decided to end their relationship on the night of June 10th. She likely agreed to meet with him after work to talk things through. Police theorized that during this encounter, Marita's anger boiled over. What began as a conversation spiraled into violence, ending with a brutal attack. This was still only a theory, and the police needed hard evidence to move forward soon. New information surfaced. Investigators learned that Marita owned a car he drove daily. Just 2 days after Ogawa Tenko's body was discovered, he took that car into a repair shop. The timing was suspicious. Officers immediately went to question the mechanics who had worked on the vehicle. One mechanic recalled that Marita was a regular customer in the past. He often brought a woman with him, showing small gestures of affection that made them look very much like a couple. But on June 13th, he came in alone this time. The car had a damaged side mirror and a dent near the front passenger window. The mechanic at first assumed it was the result of a simple accident, yet on closer inspection, the damage didn't look like the aftermath of a collision. There were no other consistent impact marks. The mechanic asked if perhaps Marita's girlfriend had damaged the car in anger at that moment. Marita visibly stiffened, his face tightened with unease, and he avoided answering, reading the tension. The mechanic dropped the subject when shown a photograph of Ogawa Tenko. The mechanic immediately identified her as the woman Marita had so often brought with him. By this point, suspicion around Marita Banjo was mounting rapidly. Pieced together what they believed had happened. After work, Ogawa Tenko got into Marita's car. The two drove out toward a more isolated stretch of road. During the drive, their argument escalated. In a fit of rage, Marita grabbed a hammer he kept in the vehicle and struck her. She attempted to flee, but he pursued her, striking again and again. During the struggle, he accidentally damaged the mirror and window of his car. Eventually, Tenko collapsed, unconscious but still alive. Panicked, Marita dragged her body to a nearby manhole and threw her inside. He knew the area well from his frequent commutes and understood there were no security cameras nearby. What he didn't anticipate was that Ogawa Tenko was not dead when he abandoned her, only unconscious. When police searched Marita's car, their suspicions were confirmed. Blood traces were discovered on the passenger seat, and, more unusually, inside the left rear brake assembly. DNA analysis confirmed the blood belonged to Ogawa Tenko. 1 week after her death, Marita Banjo was formally arrested on suspicion of murder. An examination of his phone uncovered text messages that showed a clear romantic relationship with Tenko. They also revealed recurring arguments between the two, often fueled by jealousy and accusations of infidelity. When his wife was questioned, she expressed complete shock in her eyes. Marita had been the perfect husband, devoted, loving, and a family man. She had never once suspected he was hiding an affair, and she was devastated to learn the truth during interrogation. However, Marita remained eerily calm. He denied everything, insisting he and Tenko were nothing more than colleagues. According to him, they worked together and supported each other professionally, but there was nothing inappropriate between them. Rumors had circulated, he claimed, but he had chosen to ignore them rather than fight back. On the evening of June 10th, he said Tenko asked him for a ride, since she had no transportation of her own during the trip. She suddenly became upset and demanded to be let out of the car. He said he complied, pulling over and driving away alone. After that, he claimed he had no idea what happened to her. He believed her absence at work the next day meant she had simply taken time off for the damage to his car. He claimed ignorance, perhaps, he suggested. Someone who disliked him had vandalized it as a cruel prank despite the mounting evidence. Marita Banjo refused to admit any wrongdoing, and because the crime scene was in a remote area with no surveillance footage or direct witnesses, prosecutors struggled to gather irrefutable proof for months. The case was delayed from going to trial. Finally, on November 4th, 2010, the appeals process concluded, and the trial officially began. Marita Banjo was charged with murder, concealment of a body, and related offenses. The prosecution requested a life sentence in court. Marita repeated his denials. He argued that the blood in his car meant nothing. Tenko had ridden with him frequently, and any stains could have been left behind accidentally. Regarding the blood found inside the brake assembly, he offered a strange explanation. He claimed that during a past incident, one of his tires punctured. Tenko, who was with him at the time, had helped him replace it and scraped her foot in the process, leaving behind traces of blood. Both sides fought bitterly in the courtroom. The prosecution leaned on circumstantial evidence, the recovered emails that hinted at a crumbling romance, the suspiciously timed car repairs, and the testimony of a truck driver who recalled seeing a car resembling Rita's parked with its headlights on near the crime scene on the night of the murder. Tenko's friend, Yuna, also testified that Tenko had confided in her about threats of violence from Marita in the weeks before her death. The defense countered with the narrative that Marita had indeed given Tenko a ride, but that he bore no responsibility for what happened after she left his car. They painted the death as a tragic misfortune, one that had nothing to do with him. The courtroom remained divided, and as the trial unfolded, it became a battle not only over evidence, but over perception. Was Marita Banjo a cold-blooded killer trying to erase his mistake, or an unlucky man caught in the web of circumstance and suspicion? Some other degenerative illness doctors were consulted, and a series of medical tests were carried out, but strangely, the results showed nothing conclusive. No tumor, no dementia, no stroke, nothing that could fully explain the rapid decline in her physical and cognitive health. As the weeks passed, her symptoms worsened. Gazelle, once energetic and sharp-minded, became frail, paranoid, and increasingly confused. She sometimes failed to recognize her own children, forgetting names and faces. At other times, she experienced violent stomach pains, dizziness, and episodes of uncontrollable vomiting. Her children began to suspect that something far more sinister was happening behind the scenes. The sudden onset, the strange array of symptoms, and the fact that Gazelle had always been healthy until their move to Marzinet didn't add up. One of her sons decided to quietly investigate. When he visited their countryside home, he noticed something peculiar in the kitchen: bottles of herbal remedies, jars of strange powders, and packets of chemicals not usually found in an ordinary household. Even more unsettling, most of these containers were labeled in Dominique's handwriting. The children, though shocked, struggled with an unbearable dilemma. Could their father, the man they had always trusted, the man who had been married to their mother for decades, be intentionally harming her? It seemed unthinkable, yet the possibility gnawed at them. By now, Gazelle was barely able to walk without assistance, and her weight had plummeted dangerously low. Each hospital visit left doctors puzzled. and Dominique always appeared attentive and loving at her bedside, convincing others that he was a devoted husband, caring for his ailing wife. But suspicion continued to grow, and soon, whispers reached the authorities. Police were alerted to the strange circumstances and launched an investigation. They began quietly monitoring Dominique, analyzing financial records, and even testing Gazelle's biological samples. What they discovered would shock not only the family, but the entirety of France. The investigation took a decisive turn when toxicology tests were ordered on Gazelle's blood, hair, and urine samples. The results revealed the shocking truth. She had been systematically poisoned with heavy metals, including arsenic and thallium, substances that accumulate slowly and produce exactly the symptoms she had been suffering: hair loss, memory decline, gastrointestinal pain, and extreme fatigue. This discovery immediately turned suspicion onto Dominique, the only person with daily access to her food and drinks. Police began to track his movements discreetly. In a search of the couple's countryside home, they found traces of toxic substances in the pantry and under the sink, camouflaged among common household products. Some of the bottles had been meticulously relabeled to avoid drawing attention. The more investigators dug, the darker the picture became. Dominique, who outwardly appeared to be a loyal husband, had been hiding a dangerous secret life. Financial records revealed large debts far beyond the 75,000 euros his wife had discovered years earlier. He had continued borrowing, gambling, and making reckless business deals, leaving him in financial ruin. Life insurance policies taken out on Gazelle were another red flag. Dominique stood to gain a substantial payout in the event of her death. The evidence pointed clearly toward a premeditated plan to eliminate his wife for money. The children were torn apart. They had grown up idolizing their father, seeing him as the strong, protective head of the family. The idea that he could be poisoning their mother felt like a nightmare. Yet, confronted with the toxicology results, they could no longer deny reality. Pulse decided it was time to act. Dominique was arrested and taken into custody. During interrogation, he at first denied everything, claiming his wife's illness was a mystery that baffled even doctors. But investigators pressed on, showing him the forensic results, the bottles of poison from his home, and his financial records. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Dominique eventually broke. His confession was chilling. He admitted to slipping poison into his wife's food and drinks over a prolonged period, hoping her death would appear natural. He described how he mixed small doses into soups, teas, and even medicine, carefully monitoring her decline while maintaining the facade of a caring husband. The betrayal devastated the entire family. Gazelle's children, who had trusted their father all their lives, were forced to confront the horrifying reality that the man they loved had tried to kill the woman who had been the heart of their home. When the case went to trial, the courtroom was filled with journalists, shocked neighbors, and grieving family members. The French public followed every detail closely, horrified at the idea of a husband methodically poisoning his wife after decades of marriage. Prosecutors painted Dominique as a cold and calculating man, willing to sacrifice the woman who had supported him through every hardship, all for financial gain. In 2013, the verdict was delivered. Dominique Pellet was found guilty of attempted murder by poisoning. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison, one of the harshest sentences in French legal history for a crime of this nature. Though physically weakened, survived, thanks to her children's persistence and the timely intervention of police and doctors. However, her health never fully recovered, and the trauma of betrayal left permanent scars. This case remains etched in France's judicial history, not only because of the shocking crime itself, but because it shattered the illusion of a perfect marriage and revealed how carefully hidden darkness can lie beneath the surface of domestic life. Doctors initially suspected serious illnesses: cancer, brain tumors, or degenerative disease. Dominique took his wife from hospital to hospital, both large and small, but each doctor gave the same puzzling conclusion. Gazelle was medically fine, her brain scans were clear, her body showed no trace of tumors or abnormal disease. The only advice they could offer was rest and reduced stress, but Gazelle knew something was terribly wrong. Her health was unraveling before her eyes. She grew thinner. With each passing week, nights were the worst. She would wake in terror, unable to remember what had happened, feeling as though she had fallen into a dark abyss she could not escape. Her body ached. Her mind was clouded, and yet no cause could be found. Then came the blow that left her paralyzed with fear. During a medical checkup, Gazelle was diagnosed with a sexually transmitted disease. She was devastated. A woman who had always been meticulous about hygiene, who had only ever been intimate with her husband, could not understand how this was possible. Humiliated and terrified, she told no one, not even her children. She carried the burden in silence, but silence could not hide the changes in her. Her children noticed her decline, the forgetfulness, the sudden dependence. The once strong woman now afraid to drive, or even step outside, alone in conversations. She tried to keep up appearances, even saying with a smile, "I'm lucky to have such a wonderful husband caring for me," but inside, she was breaking. Then, in September 2020, her fragile world shattered on the 12th. Just after returning from a trip to southern France, Gazelle received a call from the police. Dominique had been arrested. The charge: secretly filming women at a convenience store. At first, she refused to believe it. Dominique, the man she had trusted for 15 years, the kind father and devoted husband, could never do something so depraved. She thought it must be a mistake. But when police laid out the evidence, denial was no longer possible. Dominique admitted to the behavior, giving a weak excuse that he had felt lonely while Gazelle was away, though released on bail. The incident cracked open the first door into a much darker reality. Police soon discovered that Dominique was not just a casual voyeur. His device, his phones, computers, storage drives, contained troves of hidden files, and within those files, investigators found something far more disturbing than videos from a Gazelle and Dominique were summoned to the station days later. She sat in the interrogation room, uneasy and confused. Police began with probing, intimate questions about her marriage, questions she found humiliating and invasive. They asked about their sex life, about possible group encounters, even about swinger clubs. Gazelle, a proper and faithful woman, was horrified. "No, never," she insisted. Then, the officers placed a photograph in front of her. It showed a woman asleep in bed, with a man lying beside her. Gazelle squinted, confused, then looked closer at the background, the bedside table, the bedspread recognition set. In it was her bedroom. The next photograph left no doubt. The woman in the bed was Gazelle, but she had no memory of the scene, and worse, the man beside her was not Dominique. Her stomach turned as police revealed the truth. On Dominique's computer, they had uncovered a hidden folder containing thousands of photos and videos, images of Gazelle, drugged, unconscious, being assaulted by strange men, sometimes repeatedly in one night. The files were meticulously catalogued by Dominique himself. Dates, times, names of abusers. One folder read, May 26, 2020. Night Mark Sodu, 5th time. And it wasn't just one incident. There were records spanning nearly a decade, from 2011 until September 2020, when Dominique's arrest finally stopped him. Confronted with this evidence, Gazelle collapsed in horror. The man she trusted most had orchestrated years of unimaginable betrayal and violence, turning her marriage into a waking nightmare. Her disbelief. She had never given consent, had no memory of these assaults, and could not fathom how such things could have been happening right under her roof for so many years. The realization was like a thunderclap. Her unexplained illnesses, the blackouts, the body aches, the terrifying memory gaps, all of it suddenly made sense. She had not been suffering from a mysterious disease. She had been drugged. Police investigators laid out their findings with careful precision. Dominique had maintained a secret, systematic routine for nearly a decade. He laced his wife's food and drinks with strong sedatives, waiting until she lost consciousness before bringing strangers into their home. These men would then assault Gazelle while Dominique filmed the entire ordeal. His meticulous records, labeled folders, timestamps, and even written logs showed the cold, organized nature of his crimes for Gazelle. The horror was unbearable. She was not only betrayed by her husband, the man she had trusted for 15 years, but also humiliated and violated in ways she had never imagined possible. The police revealed that Dominique had shared some of these recordings on hidden online networks, exchanging them with other predators in underground communities. Her children, who had been by her side through her mysterious illness, were now confronted with a darker truth than they ever could have anticipated. The strange powders, the unexplained medications, the constant hospital visits, everything pointed to a chilling reality. Dominique had been deliberately poisoning and drugging their mother to facilitate years of exploitation. When Dominique was confronted with the full scope of evidence, his responses were chillingly cold. He admitted to drugging Gazelle, but insisted that it was a way to cope with his desires. He showed no remorse, only excuses. At times, he claimed loneliness. At others, he justified his actions as experiments. The police, prosecutors, and even seasoned investigators were shaken. They had uncovered not just a case of voyeurism, but a decade-long nightmare of calculated abuse and deception. Gazelle, meanwhile, was left to face the devastating truth that her reality had been stolen from her 4 years. Gazelle made it clear to investigators that she had absolutely no knowledge of the existence of those disturbing images and videos. Her panicked, genuine reaction, combined with the evidence on the recordings showing her lying completely motionless, never stirring, never waking during the assaults, convinced police that she had indeed been unaware of everything. With that, all attention turned to Dominique, man she had trusted completely for more than a decade. How could he possibly explain away such monstrous evidence? At the investigative agency, faced with undeniable proof, Dominique quickly confessed. He admitted that before filming his wife, he had deliberately given her large quantities of sleeping pills and anti-anxiety medication. These drugs left Gazelle in a state of near unconsciousness, unable to resist or even know what was happening. What shocked police most was that Dominique had been fully aware all along that these substances were the cause of her declining health, yet, while pretending to be the perfect, supportive husband, he had been the very one destroying her from within. In his statement, Dominique revealed the calculated escalation of his crimes. At first, he had only experimented giving Gazelle anti-anxiety medication after noticing it made her drowsy, but once he realized he could render her unconscious, he began steadily increasing the dosage until he was sure she would remain completely incapacitated. Satisfied with the outcome, he initiated his depraved acts. Initially, he abused his wife alone, justifying it by saying he knew Gazelle was traditional and would never consent to such things while awake. But his desires soon escalated. He began recording the assaults and sharing them with others online. The entry point was an underground chat room called, without his or her knowledge, true to its name. The forum was a haven for predators, boasting about exploiting unconscious partners. Dominique became an active and admired member there, bragging in detail about his methods, what drugs he used, how long they took to work, and how thoroughly he prepared the scene. Soon, he was inviting strangers to his own home to assault his incapacitated wife. The meticulous planning was staggering. Dominique required his accomplices to park their cars far from the house to avoid suspicion. They were made to wait until he was certain Gazelle was fully unconscious before entering. They had to undress in the kitchen, so no stray clothing would be discovered. He forbade them from wearing perfume or smoking beforehand, and even demanded they wash their hands in warm water so that the temperature wouldn't risk waking her. Dominique watched the assaults unfold, directing the men and even ordering that no one use condoms. This reckless demand was the reason Gazelle, despite being scrupulously clean, contracted multiple sexually transmitted infections. One man later admitted he was thrown out by Dominique after only 30 minutes because Gazelle began to stare after each assault. Dominique carefully cleaned and redressed his wife to remove all traces. Then, he would upload the recordings as advertisements to lure in more men. Police analysis of Dominique's computer revealed that from 2011 to September 2020, Gazelle had been victimized at least 92 times. Investigators were horrified at the thought that Dominique's supermarket incident never occurred. Exposing his secret files, how many more years of torment would she have endured? On June 19, 2023, prosecutors released a staggering 370-page report indicting 51 men connected to the case. One man had already died of cancer, escaping punishment, but the others, ranging in age from 26 to 74, came from all walks of life: civil servants, postal workers, firefighters, laborers. Even lawyers among them were individuals. Knowingly, HIV-positive police admitted the true number was likely much higher, as more than 20 participants remained unidentified or beyond the reach of solid evidence. At first, many wondered if Dominique's motive had been financial, but investigators determined that wasn't the case. He never accepted money, spent his own resources on recording equipment, and even took extreme measures to erase all physical evidence from his wife's body after each assault. His crimes were not about profit, they were about perversion, domination, and obsession, and the horrors didn't stop with Gazelle. Forensic experts uncovered files proving Dominique had also targeted his own daughter, Caroline, and both of his daughters-in-law. With the daughters-in-law, police found hidden camera videos of them bathing, but with Caroline, the material was far darker. One file, chillingly titled "Most Successful Time in Over 20 Years," showed her lying in bed, in a state resembling her mother's drugged condition. Though no men appeared in the footage, Caroline believed she too had been abused. Dominique, however, denied this particular act. Even as the investigation pressed on, more revelations followed. Police arrested one of Dominique's closest online associates, a man who had assaulted Gazelle at least 6 times inside her own home. Even more horrifying, Dominique himself had traveled to this man's residence on multiple occasions to rape his wife. What emerged was not just a lone redditor, but a network of abusers operating in secrecy, swapping victims as though they were possessions. And then came the final, devastating link to Dominique's past. Back in 1991, a 23-year-old real estate broker named Sophie had been found murdered in her suburban Paris apartment. The autopsy revealed she had been drugged, sexually assaulted, and killed, though police suspected a serial predator. The case had gone cold for decades. It wasn't until 2020, when Dominique's DNA was compared against old evidence, that a match was confirmed. He was charged immediately. Though Dominique continued to deny involvement in Sophie's murder, he did confess to another attack in 1999. He had drugged and assaulted a 19-year-old real estate worker in Paris. By sheer luck, she escaped alive. In September 2, 2024, Dominique's trial finally began, and because of the sheer number of defendants involved, it was expected to stretch on for several months. At this crucial turning point, Gazelle made a courageous choice. She decided to step out of the shadows and reveal her identity to the public. At first, she had planned to protect her privacy, but after much soul-searching, she realized that her story could serve as a lifeline for other victims, suffering in silence once the shocking truth of her husband's monstrous acts became public. Gazelle acted with remarkable clarity. She wasted no time packing her belongings. She ended her marriage without hesitation. She then faced perhaps the most painful task of all, telling her 3 children the unimaginable reality of their father's double life. With honesty and bravery, she explained the horrors that had been hidden in their home for years. In response, her children chose to stand firmly beside her, offering unconditional support as she pursued justice in the courtroom. Gazelle publicly denounced her husband. She demanded a transparent trial, not just for her own healing, but to ensure that the other men involved were exposed as well. For 50 years I lived with a man I never imagined capable of such crimes, she declared with unwavering strength. Dominique, desperate to hold on to the wife he had so cruelly betrayed, made one final plea in a hollow, remorseful tone. He said, "I'm at fault. I regret everything I've done. Please forgive me." But Gazelle answered him not with words, but with silence. She turned away, descending from the witness stand with a resolute step that spoke louder than anything she could have said. It was the definitive end to their marriage, and the clearest declaration that she would never allow him power over her life again. During the proceedings, Dominique's lawyer attempted to provide context, revealing that his client had been assaulted at age 9 and exposed to adult sexual activity at just 14. These traumatic experiences, the defense argued, had warped his psychology and influenced his later crimes even within his own family. The betrayals ran deep. Dominique's two daughters-in-law gave powerful testimony. The elder spoke through tears, saying that while being secretly filmed had devastated her, her greatest fear was for her own children, that they too might have been targeted by their grandfather. The younger recalled a memory that now chilled her to the core. Dominique once suggested to her young son, "Let's play doctor and patient." At the time she dismissed it as harmless. But under the weight of these revelations, it took on a horrifying new meaning. Dominique denied harming his grandchildren, insisting he would never cross that line. He admitted to his crimes against his wife, but tried to justify them, saying his childhood trauma and his fantasy of partner swapping had spiraled into a destructive addiction. His words only underscored the twisted psychology of a man who, though once a victim, had chosen to become a predator himself. The charges against him were immense rape, gang rape, and violations of privacy for secretly recording and distributing non-consensual pornography for nearly a decade. He had orchestrated a network of men online to assault his drugged wife, documenting everything. Dominique's trial, ongoing and expected to continue until late 2024, has drawn enormous public attention. Each court session left a powerful impression, especially the moments when Gazelle exited the courtroom outside. She was greeted with waves of applause, a symbol of solidarity from strangers who admired her courage from a silenced victim of domestic abuse. She had risen to embody resilience and defiance, becoming a beacon of hope for countless others living in fear. Story 6. On May 11, 2016, Lang Jia, a Chinese exchange student at Anhalt University of Applied Sciences in Dessau, Germany, prepared for her routine evening jog after putting away groceries. In her dorm, she changed into her workout clothes, although it was already 8:30 p.m. The northern German sky was still bright with daylight, saying goodbye to her roommate. Jia put on her headphones and headed out along her usual running route, which took her past the old town, the local museum, and through the city park. But that evening, things took an unexpected turn. Not long after starting her run, she was stopped by a young woman with delicate, doll-like features near a nearby apartment building. The two spoke briefly, and although Jia seemed hesitant, she ultimately agreed to follow the stranger inside. The next morning, her friend and classmate Zhou Lei Hong noticed something unusual. Jia hadn't responded to her usual breakfast message. Instead, Zhou received a worried call from Jia's roommate. Jia hadn't returned to the dorm the entire night. Her door stood ajar. Her clothes were scattered on the bed, and both her phone and running gear were missing. Her phone remained switched off. This was deeply alarming. Jia was known as a careful, disciplined young woman. She rarely socialized outside of her circle of international classmates, and while she spoke fluent English, her limited German made it highly unlikely she would simply stay out without informing anyone. Her friends immediately reported her disappearance to the university. The administration quickly mobilized staff and students for a search. They combed through classrooms, laboratories, the library, as well as Jia's jogging route and the spots she frequented by 1 p.m. With no sign of her, the university turned to police. The Dessau police launched a large-scale search, deploying helicopters, search dogs, and officers to scour areas where she might have gone, focusing especially on neighborhoods known for higher crime rates. Meanwhile, the Chinese community in Germany rallied together, spreading the word and volunteering in the search. Yet, after a full day and night of exhaustive efforts, no trace of Jia was found. School described Yang Jie as a polite, sheltered young woman, someone inexperienced in love, who lived quietly between her dormitory and her classes. She rarely went out, never stayed away overnight, and struggled with the German language. How could such a girl plausibly have initiated a sexual encounter with two strangers who didn't even speak her language? The backlash was immediate. A close friend of Yang Jie stepped forward, telling police that he had seen her at Central Station on the evening of May 10th, and even exchanged greetings with her. Another friend corroborated his account. Their testimony directly contradicted the couple's fabricated timeline, so why had the police broadcast such an unverified story? Were they trying to obscure something? In truth, their investigation had been misdirected from the start, if not for Mr. Lee's persistence in searching the area and pressuring authorities. The suspects may never have confessed. Following the prosecutor's statement, rumors spread like wildfire across both Chinese and German media outlets online. Strangers speculated cruelly about Yang Jie's character within days. The incident became a national controversy. Chinese international students in Germany staged protests, demanding justice and denouncing the police for their mishandling of the case. They accused investigators of deliberately concealing evidence, moving too slowly, and attempting to shield the perpetrators as outrage mounted. Reporters uncovered an explosive fact. Sebastian's mother was a senior official in the Dessau Police Department, and his stepfather was none other than the police chief. The very department leading Yang Jie's case was tied by blood to the prime suspect. The public's suspicion of a cover-up now seemed unavoidable. The revelations didn't stop there. Despite being implicated in over 40 previous theft, harassment of women, Sebastian had never faced serious consequences. It seemed as though he had lived untouched by the law, protected by family connections. By May 2016, the protests had grown. Chinese students, local Chinese organizations, and even many German citizens joined together, demanding that authorities punish the criminals and restore dignity to the victim. Under mounting pressure, officials finally suspended Sebastian's mother and stepfather. The case was transferred to the Hala Police Department. Mr. Lee later recalled a surreal detail. On May 21st, before the suspect's arrest, Sebastian's stepfather, the Dessau police chief, had personally escorted him to examine the crime scene outside the apartment. Mr. Lee had seen Sebastian himself, though at the time he did not know that the man he passed was the very suspect, and the son of the officer guiding him. Witnesses would later claim that on the night Mr. Lee pressed the police to investigate, they had seen Sebastian's parents leaving the apartment with him, carrying numerous garbage bags. When investigators finally searched the flat, it had already been scrubbed multiple times. Still, over 100 blood traces remained, some spattered as high as the ceiling. Neighbors reported hearing prolonged screams from the apartment on the night of the crime, yet they dismissed the sounds, assuming they were connected to the couple's unusual preferences. The Hala police soon obtained damning surveillance footage from the antique shop beneath Sebastian's apartment. At 9:20 p.m. on May 11th, cameras captured Yang Jie jogging past before being stopped by Xenia. The two spoke briefly, Xenia appearing anxious, almost desperate, before Yang Jie reluctantly followed her into the building. Hours later, around 2:30 a.m., Sebastian was seen wandering outside, looking around nervously. Before returning inside, Yang Jie never re-emerged. Despite this mountain of evidence, Sebastian's parents tried to explain away their actions. They claimed they had planned to move out earlier due to mold in the apartment, but the landlord quickly disproved this. The flat was in perfect condition. In fact, Sebastian had prepaid 6 months' rent after the incident and specifically requested that no one else be allowed to move in. Phone records revealed another troubling detail. On May 12th, the day after Yang Jie vanished, Sebastian had called his mother more than 10 times, an unusually high number, even before turning himself in. He spent 40 minutes on the phone with her. Finally, on November 25, 2016, the trial officially began. Sebastian's parents secured top defense lawyers, advising their son and Xenia to hide their faces with documents in court, remain silent, and let the legal team speak for them. The defense quickly targeted the most crucial evidence, the surveillance footage. They argued that the antique shop's camera system had flaws, and that the images could not reliably prove Yang Jie entered the apartment. The defense team tried to undermine the credibility of the surveillance video. They argued that the camera installed at the antique shop was outdated, poorly positioned, and lacked clarity, making it impossible to identify the individuals with absolute certainty. They claimed that what appeared to be Yang Jie entering the apartment with Xenia could not be conclusively proven, and they pushed for the footage to be excluded as unreliable. However, prosecutors countered that while the video might not have been perfect in quality, it was corroborated by other evidence, witness statements, phone records, and, most importantly, the physical traces of Yang Jie's DNA inside Sebastian's apartment. The footage was not presented in isolation. It was part of a larger chain of evidence that painted a chillingly consistent picture. Meanwhile, the courtroom atmosphere was tense. Yang Jie's parents sat quietly but firmly, their grief visible in every movement for them. The trial was not only about punishing the criminals, but also about restoring their daughter's dignity, which had been damaged by the reckless press conference and the false insinuations about her characters, Bastian and Xenia, hiding behind stacks of documents to obscure their faces from the press and public. Remained silent throughout most of the proceedings. Their lawyers spoke on their behalf, employing every possible strategy to downplay their actions. At one point, the defense suggested that the fatal outcome was an accident, that the couple had not intended to kill Yang Jie. This claim sparked outrage among those present. Their prosecution, however, laid out a starkly different narrative. They highlighted the brutality of the injuries, the deliberate cleanup of the crime scene, and the attempts to mislead investigators. They emphasized the influence of Sebastian's family within the police department, suggesting that without public pressure, the case might have been buried under layers of corruption and cover-ups. Public opinion outside the courtroom was just as heated. Both Chinese and German communities rallied, demanding justice. Candlelight vigils were held, students marched in protest, and online forums buzzed with debates about racism, power, and accountability within law enforcement. By the end of 2016, it was clear that this was no ordinary trial. It had become a symbol of confrontation between truth and concealment, between privilege and vulnerability, and between a grieving family's fight for justice and a system that had tried to silence them. The antique shop's camera didn't capture Yang Jie being harmed, and the outdoor surveillance footage was ruled inadmissible because it was in a public area tied to privacy concerns. This meant the video could only confirm that Yang Jie entered the apartment, but it could not show whether she ever left. The defense leaned on this gap, hoping to weaken the prosecution's case, but prosecutors had far more than just footage. In the days leading up to the murder, Sebastian had used his computer to search for terms like Asian women, bondage, and beating. On the very morning Yang Jie was killed, he looked up instructions on how to hide a body. Police also uncovered numerous violent, pornographic videos stored on both Sebastian's and Xenia's phones. Combined with DNA test results and the antique shop surveillance, the evidence formed a damning chain the defense could not ignore. By the 10th court session, Xenia finally wavered. She confessed that she had been abused by her stepfather throughout childhood, leaving her with low self-esteem. After meeting Sebastian, she claimed she indulged his every demand, fearing his anger and violence. On the night of the murder, she said Sebastian told her to lure someone to their apartment. She tricked Yang Jie, telling her there was a heavy box that needed lifting. Once inside, Sebastian attacked immediately, dragging Yang Jie into a night of torture. According to Xenia, whenever Yang Jie resisted, she was beaten afterward. Xenia went upstairs to shower. When she returned, she found the floor stained with blood. She said she cried out, asking why Yang Jie hadn't been released. Sebastian's answer was chilling: because she didn't obey. Together, they stuffed Yang Jie's body into a trash bin and threw it from a second-floor window under the cover of night. Sebastian then circled the building to ensure the body was well hidden. Xenia's lawyer pleaded for leniency, citing her troubled childhood. Her youth, only 19 at the time, meant her domination under Sebastian's control, but the prosecution rejected this narrative. They argued that Xenia's story was a desperate attempt to shift blame and reduce her punishment without her deception. Yang Ji would never have entered the apartment. Furthermore, after the crime, she willingly conspired with Sebastian to mislead police. Most damning of all, the forensic report showed Yang Ji clutching strands of Xenia's hair, proof that she had fought back against Hurstel. Sebastian's defense team pushed for sympathy, claiming he suffered from severe psychological issues that should reduce his responsibility. On August 4, 2017, after 35 court sessions, the verdict was delivered. Sebastian was found guilty of murder, assault, and related charges. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, the harshest sentence under German law. Xenia, due to her confession, received 5.5 years in prison. The families of both offenders were ordered to pay 60,000 euros, roughly $71,000, in emotional damages to Yang Ji's parents. As for Sebastian's own parents, prosecutors could not prove they had actively covered up the crime, and so they were acquitted. Both Sebastian and Xenia appealed their sentences. He argued that life without parole was excessive. She claimed she had been controlled and unloved since childhood. The appeals court rejected them both, upholding the original verdicts. Justice, in the legal sense, was served, but justice cannot bring Yang Ji home. Her parents are left with an empty space that no sentence can ever fill. We can only hope she rests peacefully, and that her story reminds us all to remain vigilant for ourselves and for those we love as the rain falls softly and the night grows deeper. Thank you for joining me here at Crime Whispers. True crime stories remind us of life's mysteries and the importance of staying aware, even as we seek comfort in the quiet of the night. If you've found tonight's tale meaningful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let the rain carry you to a peaceful sleep, and until we meet again, stay safe, stay curious, and let the night watch over you.